Oh my god, I forgot to hit record. Okay, well, I guess we're starting over because I forgot to hit record. We missed the whole discussion, everything. Alright, for the fourth time since we have started this, if you're on stream with me, I'm begging you to remind me to hit record. We are now starting the chapter over. Um, I'm I'm not gonna make anybody listening to the recording miss the chapter, but you are gonna miss my discussion of it because I can't remember to hit record, and that's pretty sad. But also, nobody else can remember to hit record, and that's even sadder. Well, no, it's slightly less sad, but it's still pretty sad. Okay. Chapter 30. 217 Revisited. He took the elevator up, and it was strange, because none of them had used the elevator since they moved in. He threw the brass handle over, and it wheezed vibratoriously up the shaft, the brass gate rattling madly. Wendy had a true claustrophobe's horror of the elevator, he knew. She envisioned the three of them trapped in it between floors while the winter storms raged outside. She could see them growing thinner and weaker, starving to death, or perhaps dying on each other the way those rugby players had. He remembered a bumper sticker that he had seen in Boulder. Rugby players eat their own dead. He could think of others. You are what you eat. Or menu items. Welcome to the Overlook Dining Room. Pride of the Rockies. Eat in splendor over the roof of the world. Human haunch broiled over matches. La Specialité de la Maison. The contemptuous smile flickered over his features again. As the number 2 rose on the shaft wall, he threw the brass handle back to the home position and the elevator car creaked to a stop. He took his Excedrin from his pocket, shook 3 of them into his hand, and opened the elevator door. Nothing in the Overlook had frightened him. He felt that he and it were square. He walked up the hall, flipping his Excedrin into his mouth and chewing them one by one. He rounded the corner into the short corridor off the main hall. The door to room 217 was ajar, and the passkey hung from the lock on its white paddle. He frowned, feeling a wave of irritation, and even real anger. Whatever had come of it, the boy had been trespassing. He had been told, and told bluntly, that certain areas of the hotel were off limits. The equipment shed, the basement, and the guest rooms. He would talk to Danny about this just as soon as the boy was over his fright. He would talk to him reasonably, but sternly. There were plenty of fathers who would have done more than just talk. They would have administered a good shaking, and perhaps that was what Danny needed. But if the boy had gotten a scare, wasn't that at least just desserts? He walked down to the door, removed the passkey, dropped it into his pocket, and stepped inside. The overhead light was on. He glanced at the bed, saw it was not rumpled, and then walked directly across to the bathroom door. A curious certainty had grown in him. Although Watson had mentioned no names or room numbers, Jack felt sure that this was the room the lawyer's wife and her stud had shared. That this was the room where she had been found dead, full of barbiturates and Colorado lounge booze. Still don't know if barbiturates is that word, but we're gonna press on. He pushed the mirror-backed bathroom door open and stepped through. The light in there was off. He turned it on and observed the long Pullman car room, furnished in the distinctive early 1900s, remodeled in the 20s style that seemed common to all Overlook bathrooms, except for the ones on the third floor. Those were properly Byzantine and befitted the royalty, politicians, movie stars, and capos who'd stayed there over the years. The shower curtain, a pallid pastel pink, was drawn protectively around the long claw-footed tub. Nevertheless, they did move. And for the first time he felt a new sense of sureness, almost cockiness, that had come over him when Danny ran to him shouting, "It was her! It was her!" deserting him. A chilled finger pressed gently against the base of his spine, cooling him off 10 degrees. It was joined by others, and they suddenly rippled all the way back up his back to his medulla oblongata, playing his spine like a jungle instrument. His anger at Danny evaporated, and as he stepped forward and pushed the shower curtain back, his mouth was dry, and he felt only sympathy for his son and terror for himself. The tub was dry and empty. Relief and irritation vented in a sudden "pah" sound that escaped his compressed lips like a very small explosive. The tub had been scrubbed clean at the end of the season. Except for the rust stain under the twin faucets, it sparkled. There was a faint but definable smell of cleanser, the kind that can irritate your nose with the smell of its own righteousness for weeks, even months after it had been used. You wanted to wonder about the elevator? Did you have a question? He bent down and ran his fingertips along the bottom of the tub. Dry as a bone, not even a hint of moisture. The boy had been either hallucinating or outright lying. He felt angry again. That was when the bath mat on the floor caught his attention. He frowned down at it. What was a bath mat doing here? It should be down in the linen cupboard at the end of the wing with the rest of the sheets and towels and pillow slips. All the linen was supposed to be there. Not even the beds were really made up in these guest rooms. The mattresses had been zipped into clear plastic and then covered with bedspreads. He supposed Danny might have gone down and gotten it. The passkey would open the linen cupboard, but why? He brushed the tips of his fingers back and forth across it. The bath mat was bone dry. He went back to the bathroom door and stood in it. Everything was all right. The boy had been dreaming. There was not a thing out of place, but it was a little puzzling about the bath mat, granted, but the logical explanation was that some chambermaid, hurrying like mad on the last day of the season, had just forgotten to pick it up. Other than that, everything was... His nostrils flared a little. Disinfectant, that self-righteous smell, cleaner than thou. And soap? Surely not. But once the smell had been identified, it was too clear to dismiss. Soap. And not one of those postcard-sized bars of ivory they provide you with in hotels and motels either. This scent was light and perfumed, a lady's soap. It had a pink sort of smell. Keme or Loela, the brand that Wendy had always used in Stovington. It's nothing, it's your imagination. Yes, like the hedges. Nevertheless, they did move. They did not move. He crossed jerkily to the door, which gave on the hall, feeling the irregular thump of a headache beginning at his temples. Too much had happened today, too much by far. He wouldn't spank the boy or shake him, just talk to him. But by God, he wasn't going to add room 217 to his problems. Not on the basis of a dry bath mat and a faint smell of soap. There was a sudden rattling, metallic sound behind him. It came just as his hand closed around the doorknob, and an observer might have thought he brushed the steel of the knob, which carried an electric charge. He jerked convulsively, eyes widening, other facial features drawing in, grimacing. Then he had control of himself, a little anyway, and he let 90 of the doorknob and turned carefully around. Oh my God, it's a fucking typo, isn't it? And he let go of the doorknob and turned carefully around. His joints creaked. He began to walk to the bathroom door, step by leaden step. The shower curtain, which he had pushed back to look in the tub, was now drawn. The metallic rattle, which had sounded to him like the stir of bones in a crypt, had been the curtain rings on the overhead bar. Jack stared at the curtain. His face felt as if it had been heavily waxed. All dead skin on the outside. Live, hot rivulets of fear on the inside. The way he had felt on the playground. There was something behind the pink plastic shower curtain. There was something in the tub. He could see it, ill-defined and obscure through the plastic, a nearly amorphous shape. It could have been anything, a trick of the light, the shadow of a shower attachment, a woman long dead and reclining in her bath, a bar of soap in one stiffening hand as she waited patiently for whatever lover might come. Jack told himself to step forward boldly and rake the shower curtain back, to expose whatever might be there. Instead, with jerky, marionette strides, his heart whamming frightfully in his chest, he went back to the bed/sitting room. The door to the hall was shut. He stared at it for a long, immobile second. He could taste his terror now. It was in the back of his throat, like the taste of gone-over cherries. He walked to the door with the same jerky stride and forced his fingers to curl around the knob. It won't open, but it did. Excuse me. He turned off the light with a fumbling gesture, stepped out of the hall, and pulled the door shut without looking back. From inside, he seemed to hear an odd, wet thumping sound, far off, dim, as if something had just scrambled belatedly out of the tub, as if to greet a caller, as if it had realized the caller was leaving before the social amenities had been completed, so now it was rushing to the door, all purple and grinning, to invite the caller back inside, perhaps forever. Footsteps approaching the door, or just the heartbeat in his ears? He fumbled with the passkey. It seemed sludgy, unwilling to turn in the lock. He attacked the passkey. The tumblers suddenly fell, and he stepped back against the corridor's far wall, a little groan of relief escaping him. He closed his eyes, and all the old phrases began to parade through his mind. It seemed like there must be hundreds of them. Cracking up, not playing with a full deck, lost your marbles, guy, just went Looney Tunes, he went up and over the high side, went bananas, lost his football crackers, nuts, half a sea bag, all meaning the same thing, losing your mind. No, he whispered, hardly aware that he had been reduced to this, whimpering with his eyes shut like a child. Oh no, God, please, no. Please, God, no. But below the tumble of his chaotic thoughts, below the trip-hammer beat of his heart, he could hear the soft and futile sound of the doorknob being turned, to and fro, as if something locked in tried helplessly to get out. Something that wanted to meet him. Something that would like to be introduced to his family as the storm shrieked around them and the white daylight became black night. If he opened his eyes and saw that doorknob moving, he would go mad. So he kept them shut, and after an unknowable time, there was stillness. Jack forced himself to open his eyes, half convinced that when he did, she would be standing before him. But the hall was empty. He felt watched just the same. He looked at the peephole in the center of the door and wondered what would happen if he approached it, stared into it. What would he be eyeball to eyeball with? His feet were moving, feet don't fail me now, before he realized it. He turned them away from the hall and walked down to the main hall, his feet whispering on the blue-black jungle carpet. He stopped halfway to the stairs and looked at the fire extinguisher. He thought that the folds of canvas were arranged in a slightly different manner. He was quite sure that the brass nozzle had been pointing toward the elevator when he came up the hall. Now it was pointing the other way. "I didn't see that at all," Jack Torrance said quite clearly. His face was white and haggard, and his mouth kept trying to grin. But he didn't take the elevator back down. It was too much like an open mouth. Too much by half. He took the stairs. End of chapter 30. Oh, good lord. Isn't that something? So, that was fucked up. That was So Jack went in there to have an encounter with Miss Massey, and it's very possible that he almost did, or that he was, ruminating too deeply on his son's description of the event, and just sort of let his mind go wild the way he did in the bar. It's been established very recently that he's sort of not totally sound, but absolutely it could be the influence of the hotel. I think at this point we're still in a position where maybe we should be questioning, like, our understanding is that it should probably only be Doc that can see Miss Massey. He's the one that shines. Halloran saw Miss Massey. Other people didn't. Jack doesn't shine. Is it even possible that his encounter, like, that there was no way for him to actually have an encounter with her, and that he just, that he was going off of his son's description? But maybe not. I don't think Doc ever mentioned the fire hose to him, so God only knows what's up there, but definitely could go either way at this point. Definitely, I think there's a combination of Jack is going a little bit crazy and supernatural things are happening to him. You could even go so far as to say, and this is absolutely something that I think, that the hotel is trying to make Jack think he's going crazy. With the hedge animals that circled around him and came close to him but never attacked him, and with Miss Massey failing to get to him in time, with even just down to the way that he was so sure people were staring at him when he was at the bar, even though he was aware that everything else was fake, he was still certain that people were looking at him. I think that kind of what my theory at this point would be is that supernatural things are happening to Jack, and the hotel is trying to make him think that he's going crazy by, manipulating him in a very specific way that it doesn't do it with Doc, But that's not for certain. Chapter 31 is called The Verdict. I have a drink first. Chapter 31. The Verdict. He stepped into the kitchen and looked at them, bouncing the passkey a few inches up off his left hand, making the chain on the white metal tongue jingle, then catching it again. Danny was pallid and worn out. Wendy had been crying, he saw. Her eyes were red and darkly circled. He felt a sudden burst of gladness at this. He wasn't suffering alone, that was for sure. They looked at him without speaking. "Nothing there," he said, astounded by the heartiness of his own voice. "Not a thing." He bounced the passkey up and down, smiling reassuringly at them, watching the relief spread over their faces, and thought he had never in his life wanted a drink so badly as he did right now. End of chapter 31. Great. That's awesome. That was short. It was short, but it's not the shortest chapter that we have read so far, so you gotta expect those every once in a while. Now, these one-page chapters are now a thing that has happened, I think, on 3 different occasions. So it's kind of like he wants you to be aware that it's a thing that can happen. It's definitely an artistic choice for emphasis, I would say. Emphasis on the fact that he just completely, like, I don't know if you would call it lied to them, but definitely, like, withheld information from them that was probably very much in their, especially very much in Wendy's best interest, at least. I mean, I know he wouldn't want to tell his kid, oh yeah, I kind of do think I saw a ghost in there, but yeah, he completely was just like, nope, I had the most boring encounter ever. And on some level, I don't necessarily know that I want to call that a lie, because it seems like he's pretty convinced that he imagined everything anyways. And so, like, on some level, it makes sense to me for him to be like thinking, oh, I just got a little spooked in there, nothing happened to me, like, there's nothing in there, and just tell them there's nothing in there. But also, at the same time, like, it seems like he should tell the truth and be like, I don't think, I don't know, there's something wrong with that room. There's not, like, a person in the hotel with us, I think, but I don't know. He wanted to reassure them, he wanted to relax them, and we can tell that it was a little bit painful to have just dismissed everything that he went through in front of them, but it's what he feels like is probably the smart, or maybe even just the easy thing to do. Chapter 32 is called The Bedroom. Late that afternoon, Jack got a cot from the first floor storage room and put it in the corner of their bedroom. Wendy had expected that the boy would be half the night getting to sleep, but Danny was nodding before The Waltons was half over, and 15 minutes after they had tucked bureau, that's gotta be a typo, but I don't know what word it's supposed to be. He was far down in sleep, moveless, one hand tucked under his cheek. Wendy sat watching him, holding her place in a fat paperback copy of Cashel-Mara with one finger. Jack sat at his desk, looking at his play. Oh shit, Jack said. Wendy looked up from her contemplation of Danny. What? Nothing. He looked down at the play with smoldering ill temper. How could he have thought it was good? It was puerile. It had been done 1,000 times. Worse, he had no idea how to finish it. Once it had seemed simple enough. Denker, in a fit of rage, seizes the poker from beneath the fireplace and beats saintly Gary to death. Then, standing spread-legged over the body, the bloody poker in one hand, he screams at the audience, "It's here somewhere, and I will find it!" Then, as the lights dim and the curtain is slowly drawn, the audience sees Gary's body face down on the forestage as Denker strides into the upstage bookcase, feverishly begins pulling books from the shelves, looking at them, throwing them aside. He had thought it was something old enough to be new, a play whose novelty alone might be enough to see it through a successful Broadway run, a tragedy in 5 acts. But in addition to his sudden diversion of interest to the Overlook's history, something else had happened. He had developed opposing feelings about his characters. This was something quite new. Ordinarily, he liked all of his characters, the good and the bad. He was glad that he did. It allowed him to try and see all of their sides and understand their motivations more clearly. His favorite story, sold to a small southern Maine magazine called Contraband for copies, had been a piece called The Monkey Is Here, Paul DeLong. It had been about a child molester about to commit suicide in his furnished room. Child molester's name had been Paul DeLong, Monkey to his friends. Jack had liked Monkey very much. He sympathized with Monkey's bizarre needs, knowing that Monkey was not the only one to blame for the 3 rape murders in his past. There had been bad parents. His father a beater as his own father had been. His mother a limp and silent dish rag as his mother had been. A homosexual experience in grammar school. Public humiliation. Worse experiences in high school and college. He had been arrested and sent to an institution after exposing himself to a pair of little girls getting off a school bus. Worst of all, he had been dismissed from the institution. Let back out onto the streets, because the man in charge decided he was alright. The man's name had been Grimmer. Grimmer had known that Monkey DeLong was exhibiting deviant symptoms, but he had written the good, hopeful report and had let him go anyway. Jack had sympathized with Grimmer, too. Grimmer had to run an understaffed and underfunded institution and try to keep the whole thing together with spit, baling wire, and nickel and dime appropriations from a state legislator who had to go back and face the voters. Grimmer knew that Monkey could not interact with other people, Grimmer knew that Monkey could interact with other people, that he did not soil his pants or try to stab his fellow inmates with the scissors. He did not think he was Napoleon. The staff psychiatrist in charge of Monkey's case thought there was a better than even chance that Monkey could make it on the street, and they both knew that the longer a man is in an institution, the more he comes to need that closed environment, like a junkie with a smack. And meanwhile, people were knocking down the doors. Paranoids, schizoids, cycloids, semi-catatonics, men who claimed to have gone to heaven in flying saucers, women who had burned their children's sex organs off with Bic lighters, alcoholics, pyromaniacs, kleptomaniacs, manic depressives, suicidals. Tough old world, baby. If you're not bolted together tightly, you're gonna shake, rattle, and roll before you turn 30. Jack could sympathize with Grimmer's problem. He could sympathize with the parents of the murder victims. With the murdered children themselves, of course. And with Monkey DeLong. Let the reader lay blame. In those days, he hadn't wanted to judge. The cloak of the moralist sat badly on his shoulders. He had started the little school in the same optimistic vein. But lately he had begun to choose up sides, and worse still, had come to loathe his hero, Gary Benson, originally conceived as a bright boy more cursed with money than blessed with it, a boy who wanted more than anything to compile a good record so he could go to a good university because he had earned admission, and not because his father had pulled strings. He had become to Jack a kind of simpering goody two-shoes, a postulant before the altar of knowledge, rather than a sincere acolyte, an outward paragon of Boy Scout virtues. Inwardly cynical, filled not with real brilliance as he had first been conceived, but only with sly animal cunning. All through the play he unfailingly addressed Denker as Sir, just as Jack taught his own son to address those older and those in authority as Sir. He thought that Danny used the word quite sincerely, and Gary Benson, as originally conceived, had too. But as he had begun Act 5, it had come more and more strongly to him that Gary was using the word satirically, outwardly straight-faced, while the Gary Benson inside was mugging and leering at Denker. Denker, who had never had any of the things Gary had. Denker, who had to work all his life just to become head of a single little school. Who was now faced with ruin over this handsome, innocent-seeming rich boy who had cheated on his final composition and then cunningly covered his tracks. Jack had seen Denker the teacher as not so much different from the strutting South American Little Caesars in their banana kingdoms, standing dissidents up against the wall of the handy squash or handball court. A super zealot in a comparatively small puddle, a man whose every whim becomes a crusade. In the beginning, he had wanted to use his play as a microcosm, to say something about the abuse of power. Now he tended more and more to see Denker as a Mr. Chips figure, and the tragedy was not the intellectual racking of Gary Benson, but rather the destruction of a kindly old teacher and headmaster, unable to see through the cynical wiles of this monster masquerading as a boy. He had not been able to finish the play. Now he sat looking down at it, scowling, wondering if there was any way he could salvage this situation. He didn't really think there was. He had begun with one play, and it had somehow turned into another. Presto changeo. Well, what the hell. Either way, it had been done before. Either way, it was a load of shit. And why was he driving himself crazy about it anyway? After the day just gone by, it was no wonder he couldn't think straight. Get him down? He looked up, trying to blink the cobwebs away. Huh? I said, how are we going to get him down? We've got to get him out of here, Jack. For a moment, his wits were so scattered that he wasn't even sure what she was talking about. Then he realized and uttered a short, barking laugh. You say that as if it were so easy. I didn't mean... No problem, Wendy. I'll just change clothes in that telephone booth down in the lobby and fly him to Denver on my back. Superman Jack Torrance, they called me in my salad days. Her face registered slow hurt. I understand the problem, Jack. The radio is broken. The snow... But you have to understand Danny's problem. My God, don't you? He was nearly catatonic, Jack. What if he hadn't come out of that? But he did, Jack said, a trifle shortly. He had been frightened at Danny's blank-eyed, slack-faced state, too. Of course he had, at first. But the more he thought about it, the more he wondered if it hadn't been a piece of play acting, put on to escape his punishment. He had, after all, been trespassing. All the same, she said. She came to him and sat on the end of the bed by his desk. Her face was both surprised and worried. Jack, the bruise is on his neck. Something got at him, and I want him away from it. Don't shout, he said. My head aches. Wendy, I'm as worried about this as you are, so please don't shout. All right, she said, lowering her voice. I won't shout. But I don't understand you, Jack. Someone is in here with us. Not a very nice someone either. We have to get down to Sidewinder. Not just Danny, but all of us. Quickly. And you're sitting here reading your play. We have to get down. We have to get down. You keep saying that. You must think I really am Superman. I think you're my husband, she said softly and looked down at her hands. His temper flared. He slammed the play script down, knocking the edges of the pile out of true again, and crumpling the sheets at the bottom. It's time you got some home truths into you, Wendy. You don't seem to have internalized them, as the sociologists say. They're knocking around up in your head like a bunch of loose cue balls. You need to shoot them into the pockets, and you need to understand that we are snowed in. Danny had suddenly become active in his bed. Still sleeping, he had begun to twist and turn. The way he always did when we fought, Wendy thought dismally. And we're doing it again. Don't wake him up, Jack, please. He glanced over at Danny, and some of the flush went out of his cheeks. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I sounded mad, Wendy. It's not really for you. I broke the radio. If it's anybody's fault, it's mine. That was our big link to the outside. Ollie Ollie Oxenfree. Please come get us, Mr. Ranger. We can't stay out this late. Don't, she said, and put a hand on his shoulder. He leaned his head against it. She brushed his hair with the other hand. I guess you've got it right after what I accused you of. Sometimes I am like my mother. I can be a bitch. You have to understand, some things are hard to get over. You have to understand that. Do you mean his arm? His lips had thinned. Yes, Wendy said, and she rushed on. But it's not just you. I worry when he goes out to play. I worry about him wanting a two-wheeler next year, even one with training wheels. I worry about his teeth and his eyesight, about this thing, what he calls his shine. I worry, because he's little, and he seems very fragile, and because something in this hotel wants to hurt him. And it will go through us to get him if it has to. That's why we have to get him out, Jack. I know that. I feel that. We must get him out. Her hand had tightened painfully on his shoulder in her agitation, but he didn't move away. One hand found the firm weight of her left breast, and he began to stroke it through her shirt. Wendy, he said, and stopped. She waited for him to rearrange whatever he had to say. His strong hand on her breast felt good, soothing. I could maybe snowshoe him down. He could walk part of the way himself, but I would mostly have to carry him. It would mean camping out 1, 2, maybe 3 nights. That would mean building a travois, I don't know if that's a real word, to carry supplies and bedrolls on. We have the AM/FM radio, so we could pick a day when the weather forecast called for a 3-day spell of good weather. But if the forecast is wrong, he finished, his voice soft and measured, I think we might die. Her face had paled. It looked shiny, almost ghostly. He continued to stroke her breast, rubbing the ball of his thumb gently over the nipple. She made a soft sound from his words, or in reaction to the gentle pressure on her breast, he couldn't tell. He raised his hand slightly and undid the top button of her shirt. Wendy shifted her legs slightly. All at once her jeans seemed too tight, slightly irritating in a pleasant sort of way. It would mean leaving you alone because you can't snowshoe worth beans. It would be maybe 3 days of not knowing. Would you want that? His hand dropped to the second button, slipped it, and the beginning of her cleavage was exposed. No, she said in a voice that was slightly thick. She glanced over at Danny. He had stopped twisting and turning. His thumb had crept back into his mouth. So that was all right. But Jack was leaving something out of the picture. It was too bleak. There was something else. What? If we stay put, Jack said, unbuttoning the third and fourth buttons with that same deliberate slowness, a ranger from the park or a game warden is going to poke in here just to find out how we're doing. At that point, we simply tell him we want down. He'll see to it. He slipped her naked breasts into the wide V of the open shirt, bent, and molded his lips around the stem of the nipple. It was hard and erect. He slipped his tongue slowly back and forth across it, in a way he knew she liked. Wendy moaned a little and arched her back. Something I've forgotten. Honey, she asked. On their own, her hands sought the back of his head, so that when he answered, his voice was muffled against her flesh. How would the ranger take us out? He raised his head slightly to answer, and then settled his mouth against the other nipple. If the helicopter was spoken for, I guess it would have to be by snowmobile. But we have one of those. Ullman said so. His mouth froze against her breast for a moment, and then he sat up. Her own face was slightly flushed, her eyes overbright. Jack, on the other hand, was calm, as if he had been reading a rather dull book instead of engaging in foreplay with his wife. "If there's a snowmobile, there's no problem," she said excitedly. "We can all three go down together." "Wendy, I've never driven a snowmobile in my life." "Can't be that hard to learn. Back in Vermont, you see 10-year-olds driving them in the fields. Although what their parents are thinking, I don't know. You had a motorcycle when we met." He had, a Honda 350cc. He had traded it in on a Saab shortly after he and Wendy took up residence together. "I suppose I could," he said slowly, "but I wonder how well it's been maintained. Ullman and Watson, they run this place from May to October. They have summertime mines. I know it won't have gas in it. There may not be plugs or a battery either. I don't want you to get your hopes up over your head, Wendy." She was totally excited now, leaning over him, her breast tumbling out of her shirt. He had a sudden impulse to seize one and... Come on, turn the page. Twist it, and he had a sudden impulse to seize one and twist it until she shrieked. Maybe that would teach her to shut up. "The gas is no problem," she said. "The VW and the hotel truck are both full. There's gas for the emergency generator downstairs, too. There must be a gas can out in the shed, too, so you could carry extra." "Yes," he said, "there is." Actually, there were 3 of them. 2 5-gallons and a 2-gallon. "I'll bet the spark plugs and the battery are out there, too. Nobody would store their snowmobile in one place and the plugs and battery someplace else, would they?" "Doesn't seem likely, does it?" He got up and walked over to where Danny lay sleeping. A spill of hair had fallen across his forehead. Jack brushed it away gently. Danny didn't stir. "And if you can get it running, you'll take us out?" she asked from behind him. "On the first day the radio says good weather?" For a moment he didn't answer. He stood looking down at his son, and his mixed feelings dissolved in a wave of love. He was the way she had said, vulnerable, fragile. The marks on his neck were very prominent. "Yes," he said, "I'll get it running and we'll get out as quick as we can." Oh, thank God. He turned around. She had taken off her shirt and lay on the bed, her belly flat, her breasts aimed perkily at the ceiling. She was playing with them lazily, flicking the nipples. "Hurry up, gentlemen," she said softly. "Time." After, with no light burning in the room but the night light that Danny had brought with him from his room, she lay in the crook of his arm, feeling deliciously at peace. She found it hard to believe they could be sharing the overlook with a murderous stowaway. "Jack." "What's got at him?" He didn't answer her directly. "He does have something. Some talent the rest of us are missing. The most of us, beg pardon. Maybe the Overlook has something too." "Ghosts?" "I don't know. Not in the Algernon Blackwood sense, that's for sure. More like the residues of the feelings of the people who have stayed here, good things and bad things. In that sense, I suppose that every hotel's got its ghosts. Especially the old ones." "But a dead woman in the tub. Jackie's not losing his mind, is he?" He gave her a brief squeeze. "We know he goes into, well, trances, for want of a better word, from time to time. We know that when he's in them, he sometimes sees things he doesn't understand. If precognitive trances are possible, they're probably functions of the subconscious mind. Freud said that the subconscious never speaks to us in a literal language, only in symbols. If you dream about being in a bakery where no one speaks English, you may be worried about your ability to support your family, or maybe just that no one understands you. I've read that the falling dream is a standard outlet for feelings of insecurity. Games, little games. Conscious on one side of the net, subconscious on the other, serving some cockamamie image back and forth. Same with mental illness, with hunches, all of that. Why should precognition be any different? Maybe Danny really did see blood all over the walls of the presidential suite. To a kid his age, the image of blood and the concept of death are nearly interchangeable. To kids, the image is always more accessible than the concept anyway. William Carlos Williams knows that. He was a pediatrician. When we grow up, concepts gradually get easier, and we leave the images to the poets. And I'm just rambling on. I like to hear you ramble. She said it, folks. She said it. You all heard it. The marks on his neck, Jack, those are real. Yes. There was nothing else for a long time. She had begun to think he must have gone to sleep. She was slipping into a drowse herself when he said, I can think of 2 explanations for those, and neither of them involves a fourth party in the hotel. What? She came up on one elbow. Stigmata, maybe, he said. Stigmata? Isn't that when people bleed on Good Friday or something? Yes, sometimes people who believe deeply in Christ's divinity exhibit bleeding marks on their hands and feet during the Holy Week. It was more common in the Middle Ages than now. In those days, such people were considered blessed by God. I don't think the Catholic Church proclaimed any of it as out-and-out miracles, which was pretty smart of them. Stigmata isn't much different from some of the things the yogis can do. It's better understood now, that's all. People who understand the interaction between the mind and the body. Study it, I mean. No one understands it. Believe we have a lot more control over our involuntary functions than they used to think. You can slow your heartbeat if you think about it enough. Speed up your own metabolism. Make yourself sweat more. Or make yourself bleed. You think Danny thought those bruises onto his neck? Jack, I can't believe that. I can believe it's possible, though it seems unlikely to me too. What's more likely is that he did it to himself. To himself? He's gone into these trances and hurt himself in the past. Do you remember that time at the supper table? About 2 years ago, I think. We were super pissed at each other. Nobody talking very much. Then, all at once, his eyes rolled up into his head, and he went face first into his dinner. Then onto the floor. Remember? Yeah, she said. I sure do. I thought he was having a convulsion. Another time we were in the park, he said. Just Danny and I. Saturday afternoon. He was sitting on a swing, coasting back and forth. He collapsed onto the ground. It was like he'd been shot. I ran over and picked him up, and all of a sudden he just came around. Sort of blinked at me and said, I hurt my tummy. Tell Mommy to close the bedroom windows if it rains. And that night it rained like hell. Yes, and he's always coming in with cuts and scraped elbows. His shins look like a battlefield in distress. When you ask him how he got this one or that one, he says, oh, I was playing, and that's the end of it. Jack, all kids get bumped and bruised up. With little boys, it's almost constant from the time they learn to walk to when they're 12 or 13. And I'm sure Danny gets his share, Jack responded. He's an active kid. But I remember that day in the park and that night at the supper table. And I wonder if some of our kids' bumps and bruises come from just keeling over. That Dr. Edmonds said Danny did it right there in his office, for Christ's sake. All right, but those bruises were fingers. I'd swear to it. He didn't get them falling down. He goes into a trance, Jack said. Maybe he sees something that happened in that room. An argument, maybe a suicide, violent emotions. It isn't like watching a movie. He's in a highly suggestible state. He's right in the damn thing. His subconscious is maybe visualizing whatever happened in a symbolic way, as a dead woman who's alive again. Zombie, undead, ghoul, you pick your term. You're giving me goosebumps, she said thickly. I'm giving myself a few. I'm no psychiatrist, but it seems to fit so well. The walking dead woman as a symbol for dead emotions, dead lives that just won't give up and go away. But because she's a subconscious figure, she's also him. In the trance state, the conscious Danny is submerged. The subconscious figure is pulling the strings. So Danny puts his hands around his neck and, stop, she said. Okay, I get the picture. I think that's more frightening than having a stranger creeping around the halls, Jack. You can move away from a stranger, but you can't move away from yourself. You're talking about schizophrenia. Of a very limited type, he said, but a trifle uneasily. And of a very special nature, because he does seem to be able to read thoughts, and he really does seem to have precognitive flashes from time to time. I can't think of that as mental illness no matter how hard I try. We all have schizo deposits in us anyway. I think as Danny gets older, he'll get it under control. If you're right, then it's imperative that we get him out. Whatever he has, this hotel is making it worse. Well, I wouldn't say that, he objected. If he would have done as he was told, he never would have gone up to that room in the first place. Never would have happened. My God, Jack, are you implying that being half strangled was a fitting punishment for being off limits? No, of course not. But no buts, she said, shaking her head mildly. The truth is, we're guessing. We don't have any idea when he might turn a corner and run into one of those air pockets, one reel horror movies, whatever they are. We have to get him away. She laughed a little in the darkness. Next thing we'll be seeing things. Don't talk nonsense, he said, and in the darkness of the room he saw the hedge lions bunching around the path, no longer flanking it but guarding it. Hungry November lions. Cold sweat sprang out on his brow. You really didn't see anything, did you? She was asking. I mean, when you went up to that room, you didn't see anything. The lions were gone. Now he saw a pink pastel shower curtain with a dark shape lounging behind it. The closed door, that muffled, hurried thump, the sounds after it that might have been running footsteps, the horrible lurching beat of his own heart as he struggled with the passkey. Nothing, he said, and that was true. He had been strung tip, not sure of what was happening. He hadn't had a chance to sift through his thoughts for a reasonable explanation concerning the bruises on his son's neck. He had been pretty damn suggestible himself. Hallucinations could sometimes be catching. And why haven't you changed your mind? About the snowmobile, I mean. His hands clamped into sudden tight fists. Stop nagging me, by his sides. I said I would, wouldn't I? I will. Now go to sleep. It's been a long, hard day. And how, she said. There was a rustle of bedclothes, and she turned toward him and kissed his shoulder. I love you, Jack. I love you too, he said. But he was only mouthing the words. His hands were still clenched into his fists. They felt like rocks on the end of his arms. The pulse beat prominently in his forehead. She hadn't said a word about what was going to happen to them after they got down, when the party was over. Not one word. It had been Danny this and Danny that, and Jack, I'm so scared. Oh yeah, she was scared a lot of the closet boogeyman and jumping shadows, plenty scared. There was no lack of real ones either. When they got down to Sidewinder, they would arrive with $60 and the clothes they stood up in. Not even a car. Even if Sidewinder had a pawn shop, which it didn't, they had nothing to hawk but Wendy's $90 diamond engagement ring and the Sony AM/FM radio. A pawnbroker might give him $20. A kind pawnbroker. There would be no job, not even part-time or seasonal, except maybe shoveling out driveways for $3 a shot. The picture of John Torrance, 30 years old, who had once been published in Esquire, and who had harbored dreams, not at all unreasonable dreams, he felt, of becoming a major American writer during the next decade, with a shovel from the Sidewinder Western Auto on his shoulder, ringing doorbells. That picture suddenly came to him much more clearly than the hedge lions, and he clenched his fist tighter still, feeling the fingernails sink into his palms and draw blood in mystic quarter moon shapes. John Torrance, standing in line to change his $60 into food stamps, standing in line again at the Sidewinder Methodist Church to get donated commodities and dirty looks from the locals. John Torrance explaining to Al that they just had to leave, had to shut down the boiler, had to leave the Overlook, and all it contained open to vandals or thieves on snow machines because, you see, Al, there are ghosts up there, and they have it in for my boy. Goodbye, Al. Thoughts of Chapter 4, Spring Comes for John Torrance. What then? Whatever then. They might be able to get to the west coast in the VW, he supposed. A new fuel pump would do it. 50 miles west of here, it was all downhill. He could damn near put the bug in neutral and coast to Utah. On to sunny California, land of oranges and opportunity. A man with his sterling record of alcoholism, student beating, and ghost chasing would undoubtedly be able to write his own ticket. Anything you like. Custodial engineer swamping out Greyhound buses. The automotive business, washing cars in a rubber suit. The culinary arts, perhaps, washing dishes in a diner. Or possibly a more responsible position, such as pumping gas. Job like that even held the intellectual stimulation of making change and writing out credit slips. I can give you 25 hours a week at the minimum wage. That was heavy tunes in a year when Wonder Bread went for 60 cents a loaf. Blood had begun to trickle down from his palms. Like stigmata, oh yes. He squeezed tighter, savaging himself with pain. His wife was asleep beside him, why not? There were no problems. He had agreed to take her and Danny away from the big bad boogeyman, and there weren't no problems. So, you see, Al, I thought the best thing to do would be to kill her. The thought rose up from nowhere, naked and unadorned. The urge to tumble her out of bed, naked, bewildered, just beginning to wake up, to pounce on her, seize her neck like the green thumb of young Aspen and to throttle her, thumbs on the windpipe, fingers pressing against the top of her spine, jerking her head up and ramming it back down against the floorboards again and again, whamming, whacking, smashing, crashing, jitter and jive, baby shake, rattle and roll. He would make her take her medicine, every drop, every last bitter drop. He was dimly aware of a muffled noise somewhere, just outside his hot and racing inner world. He looked across the room and Danny was thrashing again, twisting in his bed and rumpling the blankets. The boy was moaning deep in his throat, a small caged sound. What nightmare? A purple woman, long dead, shambling after him down twisting hotel corridors? Somehow he didn't think so. Something else chased Danny in his dreams. Something worse. The bitter lock of his emotions was broken. He got out of bed and went across to the boy, feeling sick and ashamed of himself. It was Danny he had to think of. Not Wendy, not himself, only Danny. And no matter what shape he wrestled the facts into him, he knew in his heart that Danny must be taken out. He straightened the boy's blankets and added the quilt from the foot of the bed. Danny had quieted again now. Jack had touched his sleeping forehead. What monster's capering just behind that ridge of bone? And he found it warm, but not overly so. He was sleeping peacefully again. Queer. He got back into bed and tried to sleep, but it eluded him. It was so unfair that things should turn out this way. Bad luck seemed to stalk them. They hadn't been able to shake it by coming up here after all. By the time they arrived in Sidewinder tomorrow afternoon, the golden opportunity would have evaporated, gone by way of the blue suede shoe, as an old roommate of his had been wont to say. Consider the difference if they didn't go down, if they could somehow stick it out. The play would get finished. One way or another he would tack an ending onto it. His own uncertainty of his characters might add an appealing touch of ambiguity to his original ending. Perhaps it would even make him some money. It wasn't impossible. Even lacking that, Al might well convince the Stovington board to rehire him. He would be on pro, of course, maybe for as long as 3 years. But if he could stay sober and keep writing, he might not have to stay at Stovington for 3 years. Of course, he hadn't cared much for Stovington before. He felt stifled, buried alive, but that had been an immature reaction. Furthermore, how much could a man enjoy teaching when he went through his first 3 classes with a skull-bustling hangover every second or third day? It wouldn't be that way again. He would be able to handle his responsibilities much better. He was sure of it. Somewhere in the midst of that thought, things began to break up, and he drifted down to sleep. His last thought followed him down like a sounding bell. It seemed that he might be able to find peace here at last. If only they would let him. When he woke up, he was standing in the bathroom of 217. Been walking in my sleep again. Why? No radios to break up here. The bathroom light was on. The room behind him was in darkness. The shower curtain was drawn around the long, claw-footed tub. The bath mat beside it was wrinkled and wet. He began to feel afraid, but the very dreamlike quality of his fear told him that it was not real. Yet that could not contain the fear. So many things at the Overlook seemed like dreams. He moved across the floor to the tub, not wanting to be helpless, to turn his feet back. He flung the curtain open. Lying in the tub, naked, lolling almost weightless by the water, was George Hatfield, a knife stuck in his chest. The water around him was stained a bright pink. George's eyes were closed. His penis floated limply like kelp. George, he heard himself say. At the word, George's eyes snapped open. They were silver, not human eyes at all. George's hands, fish-white, found the sides of the tub, and he pulled himself up to a sitting position. A knife stuck straight out of his chest, equidistantly placed between his nipples. The wound was lipless. You set the timer ahead, a silver-eyed George told him. No, George, I didn't. I don't stutter. George was standing now, still fixing him with that inhuman silver glare, but his mouth had drawn back in a dead and grimacing smile. He threw one leg over the porcelain side of the tub. One white and wrinkled foot placed itself on the bath mat. First you tried to run me over on my bike, and then you set the timer ahead. You tried to stab me to death, but still I don't stutter. George was coming for him, his hands out, the fingers slightly curled. He smelled moldy and wet, like leaves that had been rained on. It was for your own good, Jack said, backing up. I set it ahead for your own good. Furthermore, I happen to know that you cheated on your final composition. I don't cheat. And I don't stutter. George's hands touched his neck. Jack turned and ran. Ran with the floating, weightless slowness that is so common in dreams. You did cheat! He screamed in fear and anger as he chased the darkened bed/sitting room. I'll prove it! George's hands were on his neck again. Jack's heart swelled with fear until he was sure it would burst. And then at last his hand curled around the doorknob, and it turned under his hand and he yanked the door open. He plunged out, not into the second-floor hallway, but into the basement beyond the arch. The cobwebby light was on. His camp chair, stark and geometrical, stood beneath it. And all around it was a miniature mountain range of boxes and crates and banded bundles of records and invoices and God knew what. Relief surged through him. I'll find it, he heard himself screaming. He seized a damp and moldering cardboard box. It split apart in his hands, spilling out a waterfall of yellow flimsies. It's here somewhere. I will find it. He plunged his hands deep into the pile of papers and came up with a dry, papery wasp's nest in his hand and a timer in the other. The timer was ticking. Attached to his back was a length of electrical cord. that attached to the other end of the cord was a bundle of dynamite. "Here!" he screamed. "Here! Take it!" His relief became absolute triumph. He had done more than escape George. He had conquered. With these talismanic objects in his hands, George would never touch him again. George would flee in terror. He began to turn so he could confront George, and that was when George's hands settled around his neck, squeezing, stopping his breath, damming up his respiration entirely after one final dragging gasp. "I don't stutter," whispered George from behind him. He dropped the wasp's nest, and wasps boiled out of it in a furious brown and yellow wave. His lungs were on fire. His wavering sight fell on the timer, and the sense of triumph returned, along with a cresting wave of righteous wrath. Instead of connecting the timer to the dynamite, the cord ran to the gold knob of a stout black cane, like the one his father had carried after the accident with the milk truck. He grasped it, and the cord parted. The cane felt heavy and right in his hands. He swung it back over his shoulder. On the way up, it glanced against the wire from which the light bulb depended, and the light began to swing back and forth, making the room's hooded shadows rock monstrously against the floor and walls. On the way down, the cane struck something much harder. George screamed. The grip on Jack's throat loosened. He tore free of George's grip and whirled. George was on his knees, his head drooping, his hands laced together on top of it. Blood welled through his fingers. "Please," George whispered humbly, "give me a break, Mr. Torrance." "Now you'll take your medicine," Jack grunted. "Now, by God, won't you? Young pup, young worthless cur. Now, by God, right now, every drop, every single damn drop." As the light swayed above him and the shadows danced and flapped, he began to swing the cane, bringing it down again and again, his arm rising and falling like a machine. George's bloody protecting fingers fell away from his head, and Jack brought the cane down again and again and again, and on his neck and shoulders and back and arms. Except that the cane was no longer precisely a cane, it seemed to be a mallet, with some kind of brightly striped handle, a mallet with a hard side and a soft side. The business end was clotted with blood and hair, and the flat, whacking sound of the mallet against the flesh had been replaced with a hollow booming sound, echoing and reverberating. His own voice had taken on this same quality, bellowing, disembodied, and yet paradoxically it sounded weaker, slurred, petulant, as if he were drunk. The figure on its knees slowly raised its head, as if in supplication. There was not a face, precisely. It was only a mask of blood through which eyes peered. He brought the mallet back for a final whistling downstroke, and it was fully launched. Before he saw the supplicating face below him was not George's, but Danny's. It was the face of his son. "Daddy," and then the mallet crashed home, striking Danny right between the eyes, closing them forever. Something somewhere seemed to be laughing. "No!" He came out of it and standing naked over Danny's bed, his hands empty, his body sheened with sweat. His final scream had only been in his mind. He voiced it again, this time in a whisper. "No. No, Danny. Never." He went back to bed on legs that had turned to rubber. Wendy was sleeping deeply. The clock on the nightstand said it was 5:15. He lay sleepless until 7 when Danny began to stir awake, and he put his leg over the edge and began to dress. It was time to go downstairs and check the boiler. End of chapter 32. Holy shit, that was a long chapter. I gotta pee. We're gonna take a break, and then we have a lot to discuss. Yeah, it's really a game of Russian roulette, right? When I've got a P and I've got a new chapter, and I'm like, okay, I could start this chapter and then P when it's done, and the chapter is either going to be one page or a fifth of the book. That was a lot. I feel like that really probably, in my opinion, this is my hot take. I think it should have been split right at the part where it says he was standing in room 217 again. I think that should have been the last line of chapter 32. Chapter 33 should have began there and described the dream, and it would have been the length of a normal chapter, and then chapter 34 can be the snowmobile instead of chapter 33. But not a big deal. A lot happened. Well, not a whole lot happened, but we got a lot of monologue from Jack. We really are getting into his head. Everything he says about the play makes me feel strongly like it comes directly from King's mouth. We feel that he's working on this big writing project, and he's like, the way I saw these characters when I started writing them is no longer the way that I see them, and he's thinking, he's kind of talking about like this play is changing me in the way that no other writing project has before. I've always been able to divorce myself from the story and not feel like I was a part of it, but now that I'm writing these characters, Jack says, I feel like I'm a part of it, and I start to get biased readings of the characters, and I support some more and others less. And obviously, it's well known that Stephen King was himself a recovering alcoholic when he wrote this book, was himself a struggling writer who was terrified by the prospect of, not making it. He was himself both a victim and probably, I would say, based on his experiences, a perpetrator at one point of abuse. I mean, he was, you know, it's Jack Torrance is not he's not exactly a self-insert, but he's a very deeply self-introspective character on the part of King. And so I think when Jack has his monologue about how the little school has changed him because he is no longer able to view the perspectives of all of its different characters equally and unbiasedly, I feel I feel that is a little bit of truth on the part of the author. I feel like that is a thing that is happening through The Shining, and I think it's better for it, even though it's not a good thing, because I feel like it makes the book better the way it starts to focus more and more on Jack, because his inner conflict is the most interesting. Like, I love Wendy. I would die for Wendy Torrance. I think, but if the whole book was from her perspective, it would be a lot less interesting, because Wendy has never done anything wrong in her entire life, and so she doesn't really have to have lots of internal struggles about what's going on. She doesn't have to have any moral dilemmas because she is perfect in every way. Um, so the conflict that bleeds into everyone else's life, yeah, it absolutely is. So when in the monologue about the little school, when I feel like is an admittance on the part of King that he is finding himself absorbed in the character of Jack, and um, you know feels that the character is part of him in a way that no character he has written has ever been before, and that this was not his intention when he started out the book. Like, you can see the weight of the book shift in a very unsettling way, and I don't know. I think it's a look into the writing process of The Shining, which is I think is super cool. You know, the the whole book is a really interesting time for King because he was not really famous yet. He had something like 2 published books, and he was still in that place where Jack is, where he's like, I could become a great American novelist, or I could fuck The Shining book up and be on my ass. And so, I don't know, it's cool to hear those thoughts knowing that they probably come straight from his mouth, and that definitely adds a lot to Jack, adds a lot of realism to him, and it makes it easier to empathize. In my opinion, it makes it easier to empathize with Jack's fears and his struggles, knowing that they're being voiced by somebody who, in the end, made it out okay and didn't kill his wife and, took care of the Overlook, so to speak, um, and is using Jack as a representation of his fear that he would not. But anyways, all that happened, and then we got to hear from Jack. Um, he wants to find an excuse for them to be stuck in the hotel and just wait it out, because even though Danny is in danger, and even when Wendy feels like she's probably in danger too, and Jack knows on some level that he might be in danger, he knows that if they leave, they are fucked. You know, life as they know it, even as bad as it already is over. He's gonna have nowhere to work. He's gonna have no car, no job, nothing to sell. I mean, he's not gonna be able to provide for his kid. Is endangering his kid already just from giving this job up. He's really stuck between a rock and a hard place, he feels like. And although neither of his options are the right choice, he has decided that the right choice is to find some way to keep them on the mountain long enough to last this out, get the paycheck, maybe get back into Stovington. But every time he looks at Danny, he's like, no, that's the wrong choice. The right choice is to get this fucking kid out of here. He could die any day. And they don't really get into it, but they don't get into it for very long. They did a little bit in the past, but there's not a lot, especially in this chapter, of addressing like, can Jack stay behind while Wendy and Doc go and hang out in Sidewinder for a while? And the reality of that is no. If they go, Jack has to go with them, because Wendy is just not, like, because Jack can shovel driveways to have enough money to keep them in a hotel or something. And if Wendy and Doc go, they're going to go with no money, and not even with Jack to at least try and make some money for them. And they're going to not even be able to stay in a motel. So, which is sad, because that seems the closest thing to a working situation. If it were me, that would be my first thought. Is if I'm Jack, I'm like, okay, maybe I can stay on the mountain, and the two of them can go do something, live with Wendy's mom for a while or something. Of course, that is a fate worse than death, according to Wendy. But there just is no way to do it, They could call up Dr. Edmonds like, hey, maybe you could babysit our kid for a couple months. But of course, they can't even call him. The phone lines are down, the radio is broken. That snowmobile might make it down the mountain, but it's probably not gonna make it back up, if it even makes it down. So yeah, they're in a shitty situation. But Jack, although he has some doubts about his decision, seems to have basically made up his mind. He's like, I'm gonna find a way to stick it out. Even if I need to make an excuse. So the implication being that perhaps that Snowcat in the garage is going to very mysteriously cease to properly function. Right at the beginning of the season. Yeah, just about. I mean, they're snowed in at this point, but yeah, it's still early. It's not even been Thanksgiving yet, I think. Yeah, it's not even been Thanksgiving yet. But the next chapter is called Snowmobile. So if you're taking bets on what you think is going to happen, I would say a pretty safe bet is that now that Jack has pretty much decided that he wants to keep them on the mountain, the snowmobile is going to cease to function one way or another. Is everybody back from break? Roll call. Rat King and all. Sorry, Rat Mayor. Rat King call. What is it? Is that a thing? Is Rat King call a thing? I don't know why that sounds so familiar to me. Does anybody have some kind of king call thing that I'm thinking of? I'm looking this up. Nothing. Okay. I'm just deranged. Nat King Cole? What's that? Now I gotta look that up too. Oh, it's a dude. Oh, he looks fucking sick too. Okay. It's the reference you're making. Yes, I believe it is. Thank you. Before we go on, I am going to take this moment to show off a few more. Now that we're much further in, let's take a look at a few more of the pictures from the opera, because I think they're very pretty, and I wish I would have seen the opera. So let's see which ones I've got here. Okay, well, there's really just one good one that's worth seeing at this point. So let me put it on the screen. I have to fucking save it. Yeah, I'll save images. Save images, my balls. They keep changing this. UI. Posts Wendy's titties. No. Those are for my eyes only. Oh, this image is not a good resolution to be seen very clearly. I guess I'll zoom it in a bit. You don't need to see the very top. So there is the Miss Massey encounter from the Michigan Opera production of The Shining. Oh, and if you guys want, you can see him standing outside of room 217. Let me add that. You guys were not happy about that scene. I'm not really either, but I'm kind of used to it at this point. I'm kind of over it. There's hold on. They're standing outside of 217. Alright. We're making good time. Let's get back on track. Chapter 33. The Snowmobile. Sometime after midnight, while they all slept uneasily, the snow had stopped after dumping a fresh 8 inches on the old crust. The clouds had broken, a fresh wind had swept them away, and now Jack stood in the dusty ingot of sunlight, which slanted through the dirty window set into the eastern side of the equipment shed. The place was about as long as a freight car, and about as high. It smelled of grease and oil and gasoline and a faint, nostalgic, sweet grass. 4-power lawnmowers were ranked like soldiers on a review against the south wall. 2 of them the riding type that looked like small tractors. To their left were post hole diggers and round-bladed shovels made for doing surgery on the putting green, a chainsaw, the electric hedge clippers, and a long, thin steel pole with a red flag at the top. Caddy, fetch my ball in under 10 seconds and there's a quarter in it for you. Yes, sir. Against the eastern wall, where the morning sun slanted most strongly, 3 ping-pong tables had leaned against one another like a drunken house of cards. Their nets had been removed and flopped down from the shelf above. In the corner there was a stack of shuffleboard weights and a roque set, the wickets banded together with twists of wire. The brightly painted balls in an egg carton sort of thing. Strange hens you have up here, Watson. Yeah, you should see the animals down on the front lawn, ha. And the mallets, 2 sets of them standing in their racks. He walked over to them, stepping over an old 8-cell battery, which had once sat beneath the hood of the hotel truck, no doubt, and a battery charger and a pair of J.C. Penney jumper cables coiled beneath them. He slipped one of the short-handled mallets out of the front rack and held it up in front of his face, like a knight bound for battle saluting his king. Fragments of his dream, it was all jumbled now, fading, recurred. Something about George Hatfield and his father's cane. Just enough to make him uneasy, and, absurdly enough, a trifle guilty about holding a plain old garden variety roque mallet. Not that roque was such a common garden variety game anymore. His more modern cousin, croquet, was much more popular now. And a child's version of the game at that. Roque, however, that must have been quite a game. Jack had found a mildewed rule book down in the basement from one of the years in the early 20s when a North American roque tournament had been held at the Overlook. Quite a game, Schizo. He frowned a little and smiled. Yes, it was a schizo sort of game at that. The mallet expressed that perfectly. A soft end and a hard end. A game of finesse and aim, and a game of raw, bludgeoning power. He swung the mallet through the air. Whoop! He smiled a little at the powerful, whistling sound it made. Then he replaced it with the rack and turned to his left. What he saw there made him frown again. The snowmobile sat almost in the middle of the equipment shed, a fairly new one, and Jack didn't care for its looks at all. Bombardier Skidoo was written on the side of the engine cowling, facing him in black letters which had been raked backwards, presumably to connote speed. The protruding skis were also black. There was black piping to the right and left of the cowling, what they would call racing stripes on a sports car, but the actual paint job was a bright sneering yellow, and that was what he didn't like about it. Sitting there in its shaft of morning sun, yellow body and black piping, black skis and black upholstered open cockpit, it looked like a monstrous mechanized wasp. When he was running around, it would sound like that too, whining and buzzing and ready to sting. But then what else should it look like? It wasn't flying under false colors, at least, because after it had done its job, they were going to be hurting plenty. All of them. By spring, the Torrance family would be hurting so badly that what these wasps had done to Danny's hand would look like a mother's kisses. He pulled his handkerchief from his back pocket, wiped his mouth with it, and walked over to the Skidoo. He stood looking down at it, his frown very deep now, and stuffed his handkerchief back into his pocket. Outside, a sudden gust of wind slammed against the equipment shed, making it rock and creak. He looked out the window and saw the gust carrying a sheet of sparkling snow crystals towards the drifted-in rear of the hotel, whirling them high into the hard blue sky. The wind dropped, and he went back to looking at the machine. It was a disgusting thing, really. He almost expected to see a long, limber stinger protruding from the rear of it. He had always disliked goddamn snowmobiles. They shivered the cathedral silence of winter into a million rattling fragments. They startled the wildlife. They sent out huge and pollutive clouds of blue and billowing oil smoke behind them. Cough, cough, gag, gag, let me breathe. They were perhaps the final grotesque toy of the unwinding fossil fuel age, given to 10-year-olds for Christmas. You'd think after dreaming about killing his son with a hammer, he'd have more reservations about picking up the croquet mallet. He just said he didn't remember his dream. He remembered the newspaper article he had read at Stovington, a story datelined someplace in Maine. Kid on a snowmobile, barrel-assing up a road he'd never traveled before at better than 30 miles an hour. Night, his headlight off. There had been a heavy chain strung between two posts with a no trespassing sign hung from the middle. They said that in all probability the kid never saw it. The moon might have gone behind a cloud. The chain had decapitated him. Reading the story, Jack had almost been glad, and now, looking down at the machine, the feeling recurred. If it wasn't for Danny, I would take great pleasure in grabbing one of those mallets, opening the cowling and pounding until... He let his pent-up breath escape from him in a long, slow sigh. Wendy was right. Come hell or high water, or the welfare line, Wendy was right. Pounding this machine to death would be the height of folly, no matter how pleasant an aspect that folly made. It would almost be tantamount to pounding his own son to death. Fucking Luddite, he said aloud. He went back to the back of the machine and unscrewed the gas cap. He found a dipstick on one of the shelves that ran at chest height around the wall and slipped it in. The last eighth of an inch came out of wet. Not very much, but enough to see if the damn thing would run. Later he could siphon more from the Volks in the hotel truck. He screwed the cap back on and opened the cowling. No spark plugs, no battery. He went to the shelf again and began to poke along it, pushing aside screwdrivers and adjustable wrenches, a one-lug carburetor that had been taken out of an old lawnmower, plastic boxes of screws and nails and bolts of varying sizes. The shelf was thick and dark with an old grease, and the year's accumulation of dust had stuck to it like fur. He didn't like touching it. He found a small, oil-stained box with the abbreviation SKID laconically marked on it with pencil. He shook it and something rattled inside. Plugs. He held one of them up to the light, trying to estimate the gap without hunting for the gapping tool. Fuck it, he thought resentfully. Dropped the plug back into the box. If the gap's wrong, that's just too damn bad. Tough fucking titty. There was a stool behind the door. He dragged it over, sat down, and installed the 4 spark plugs, then fitted the small rubber caps over each. That done, he let his fingers play briefly over the magneto. They laughed when I sat down at the piano. Back to the shelves. This time he couldn't find what he wanted. A small battery, a 3 or 4 cell. There were socket wrenches, a case filled with drills and drill bits, bags of lawn fertilizer, and Vigoro for the flower beds, but no snowmobile battery. It didn't bother him in the slightest. In fact, it made him feel glad. He was relieved. I did my best, Captain, but I could not get through. That's fine, son. I'm going to put you in for the Silver Star and the Purple Snowmobile. You're a credit to your regiment. Thank you, sir. I did try. He began to whistle Red River Valley up tempo as he poked along the last 2 or 3 feet of shelf. The notes came out in little puffs of white smoke. He had made a complete circuit of the shed, and the thing wasn't there. Maybe somebody lifted it. Maybe Watson had. He laughed aloud. The old office bootleg trick. A few paper clips, a couple of reams of paper. Nobody will miss this tablecloth or this golden regal place setting. What about this fine snowmobile battery? Yes, that might come in handy. Toss it in the sack. White collar crime, baby. Everybody has sticky fingers. Under the jacket discount, we used to call it when we were kids. He made us sing Red River Valley so much in school. Rivers are blue. You dumb fuck school. He walked back to the snowmobile and gave the side of it a good healthy kick as he went by. Well, that was the end of it. He would just have to tell Wendy, sorry, baby, but there was a box sitting in the corner by the door. The stool had been right over it. Written on the top, in pencil, was the abbreviation SKID. He looked at it, the smile drying up on his lips. Look, sir, it's the cavalry. Looks like your smoke signals must have worked after all. It wasn't fair. God damn it, it just was not fair. Something, luck, fate, providence, had been trying to save him. Some other luck, white luck. And at that last moment, bad old Jack Torrance luck had slipped back in. The lousy run of cards wasn't over yet. That's not you speaking, is it? Holy shit, it is, nerd. Yeah, hi. Resentment, a gray, sullen wave of it, pushed up into his throat. His hands had clenched into fists again. Not fair, goddammit, not fair. Why couldn't he have looked someplace else? Any place? Why'd he had a crick in his neck, or an itch in his nose, or the need to blink? Just one of those little things. He never would have seen it. Well, he hadn't. That was all. It was a hallucination, no different from what had happened yesterday outside that room on the second floor, or the goddamn hedge menagerie. A momentary strain, that was all. Fancy, I thought it was a snowmobile battery in that corner. Nothing there now. Combat fatigue, I guess, sir. Sorry. Keep your pecker up, son. It happens to all of us sooner or later. Cute accent. I don't have an accent. Except for a gamer accent. From all my fragging and getting power-ups. He yanked the door open almost hard enough to snap the binges. That probably says hinges, but this book got fucking typos in it. And pulled his snow shoes aside. They were clotted with snow, and he slapped them down hard enough on the floor to raise a cloud of it, put his left foot on the left shoe, and paused. Danny was out there by the milk platform, trying to make a snowman by the looks. Not much luck, the snow was too cold to stick together. Still, he was giving it the old college try out there in the flashing morning. A speck of a bundled-up boy above the brilliant snow and below the brilliant sky, wearing his hat turned around backward like Carlton Fisk. What in the name of God were you thinking of? The answer came back to him with no pause. Me. I was thinking of me. He suddenly remembered lying in bed the night before, lying there, and suddenly he had been contemplating the murder of his wife. In that instant, kneeling there, everything came clear to him. It was not just Danny the Overlook was working on. It was working on him, too. It wasn't Danny who was the weak link. It was him. He was the vulnerable one, the one who could be bent and twisted until something snapped. Until I let go and sleep. What do I do? And when I do that, if I do that... He looked up at the banks of the windows, and the sun threw back an almost blinding glare from the many paned surfaces. But he looked anyway. For the first time, he noticed how much they seemed like eyes. They reflected away the sun and held their own darkness within. It was not Danny they were looking at. It was him. In those few seconds, he understood everything. There was a certain black and white picture he remembered seeing as a child, in class. A nun had presented it to them on an easel and called it a miracle of God. The class had looked at it blankly, seeing nothing but a jumble of whites and blacks, senseless and patternless. Then one of the children in the third row had gasped, "It's Jesus!" And that child had gone home with a brand new testament, and also a calendar because he had been first. The others stared even harder, Jackie Torrance among them. One by one, the other kids had given a similar gasp. One little girl, transported in near ecstasy, crying out shrilly, "I see him! I see him!" She had also been rewarded with a testament. At last, everyone had seen the face of Jesus in the jumble of blacks and whites except Jackie. He strained harder and harder, scared now, part of him cynically thinking that everyone else was simply putting on to please Sister Beatrice, part of him secretly convinced that he wasn't seeing it because God had decided he was the worst sinner in the class. Don't you see it, Jackie? Sister Beatrice had asked him in her sad, sweet manner. I see your tits, he had thought in visaged desperation. He began to shake his head, then faked excitement and said, Yes, I do! Wow, it's Jesus! And everyone in class had laughed and applauded him, making him feel triumphant, ashamed, and scared. Later, when everyone else had tumbled their way up from the church basement and onto the street, he had lingered behind, looking at the meaningless black and white jumble that Sister Beatrice had left on the easel. He hated it. They had all made it up the way he had, even the sister herself. It was a big fake. Shitfire, hellfire, shitfire, he had whispered under his breath. As he turned to go, he had seen the face of Jesus from the corner of his eye. Sad and wise. He turned his back, his heart in his throat. Everything had suddenly clicked into place, and he had stared at the picture with a fearful wonder, unable to believe he had missed it. The eyes, the zigzag of shadow across the careworn brow, the fine nose, the compassionate lips. Looking at Jack Torrance. What had only been a meaningless sprawl had suddenly been transformed into a stark black and white etching of the face of Christ our Lord. Fearful wonder became terror. He had cussed in front of a picture of Jesus. He would be damned. Before I turn the stream, I was thinking, can you just stream movies on Twitch? Yeah, I mean, if you're me, I have it in good with those guys because I don't say cracker on stream. He would be in hell with the sinners. The face of Christ had been in the picture all along. All along. Now, kneeling in the sun and watching his son play in the shadow of the hotel, he knew that it was all true. The hotel wanted Danny. Maybe all of them, but Danny for sure. The Hedges had really walked. There was a dead woman in 217. A woman that was perhaps only a spirit and harmless under most circumstances, but a woman who was now in active danger. Like some malevolent clockwork toy, she had been wound up and set in motion by Danny's own odd mind, and his own. Ian, I have 7 Discord notifications. If they're all you, you're gonna be in trouble. Had it been Watson who had told him a man had dropped dead of a stroke one day on the Rook Court, or had it been Ullman? It didn't matter. There had been an assassination on the 3rd floor. How many old quarrels, suicides, strokes, how many murders? Was Grady looking somewhere in the West Wing with an axe, just waiting for Danny to start him up so he could come back out of the woodwork? The puffed circle of bruises around Danny's neck, the twinkling, half-seen bottles in the deserted lounge, the radio, the dreams, the scrapbook he found in the cellar. I've been sleepwalking again, my dear. He got up suddenly, thrusting the snowshoes back out the door. He was shaking all over. He slammed the door and picked up the box with the battery in it. It slipped through his shaking fingers. Oh Christ, what if I cracked it? And thumped over on its side. He pulled the flaps of the carton open and yanked the battery out, heedless of the acid that might be leaking through. The battery's casing, if it had cracked. But it hadn't. It was whole. A little sigh escaped his lips. Cradling it, he took it over to the skidoo and put it on its platform near the front of the engine. He found a small adjustable wrench on one of the shelves and attached the battery cables quickly and with no trouble. The battery was live, no need to use the charger on it. There had been a crackle of electricity and a small odor of ozone when he slipped the positive cable onto its terminal. The job done, he stood away, wiping his hands nervously on his faded denim jacket. There, it should work. No reason why not. No reason at all, except that it was part of the Overlook, and the Overlook didn't really want them out of here. Excuse me. Not at all. The Overlook was having one hell of a good time. There was a little boy to terrorize, a man and his woman to set one against the other, and if it played its cards right, they could end up flitting through the Overlook's halls like insubstantial shades in a Shirley Jackson novel. Whatever walked in Hill House walked alone. But you wouldn't be alone in the Overlook. Oh no, there would be plenty of company here. But there was really no reason why the snowmobile shouldn't start. Except he still didn't really want to go. Yes, except for that. He stood looking at the skidoo, his breath puffing out in frozen little plumes. He wanted it to be the way it had been. When he had come in here, he had no doubts. Going down would be the wrong decision. He had known that then. Wendy was only scared of the boogeyman summoned up by a single, hysterical little boy. Now, suddenly, he could see her side. It was like his play, his damnable play. He no longer knew which side he was on, or how things would come out. Once you saw the face of God in those jumbled blacks and whites, it was everybody out of the pool. You could never unsee it. Others might laugh and say it's nothing, just a lot of splatches with no meaning. Just give me the good old craft, master paint by numbers any day. But you would always see the face of Christ our Lord looking out at you. You had seen it in one Gestalt leap, the conscious and unconscious melding in that one shocking moment of understanding. You would always see it. You were damned to always see it. I've been sleepwalking again, my dear. It had been all right until he had seen Danny playing in the snow. It was Danny's fault. Everything had been Danny's fault. He was the one with the shining, or whatever it was. It wasn't a shining, it was a curse. If he and Wendy had been here alone, they could have passed the winter quite nicely. No pain, no strain on the brain. Don't want to leave? Can't? The Overlook didn't want them to go, and he didn't want them to go either. Not even Danny. Maybe he was part of it now. Perhaps the Overlook, large and rambling Samuel Johnson that it was, had picked him to be its Boswell. You say the new caretaker writes? Oh, very good. Sign him on. Time we told our side. Let's get rid of the woman and his snot-nosed kid first, though. We don't want him to be distracted. We don't... He was standing by the snowmobile's cockpit, his head starting to ache again. What did it come down to? Go or stay. Very simple. Keep it simple. Shall we go, or shall we stay? If we go, how long will it be before you find the local hole in Sidewinder? A voice inside him asked. The dark place with the lousy color TV that unshaven and unemployed men spend the day watching game shows on, where the piss in the men's room smells 2,000 years old. There's always a sodden camel butt unraveling in the toilet bowl, where the beer is 30 cents a glass and you could cut it with salt, and the jukebox is loaded with 70s country oldies. How long? Oh, Christ, he was afraid it wouldn't be very long at all. I can't win, he said very softly. That was it. It was like trying to play solitaire with one of the aces missing from the deck. Abruptly, he leaned over the Skidoo's motor compartment and yanked off the magneto. It came off with sickening ease. He looked at it for a moment, then went to the equipment shed's back door and opened it. From here, the view of the mountains was unobstructed, picture postcard beautiful in the twinkling brightness of the morning. An unbroken field of snow rose to the first pines about a mile distant. He flung the magneto as far out into the snow as he could. It went much farther than it should have. There was a light puff of snow when it fell. The light breeze carried the snow granules away to fresh resting places. Disperse there, I say. There's nothing to see. It's all over. Disperse. He felt at peace. He stood in the doorway for a long time, breathing the good mountain air, and then he closed it firmly and went back out the other door to tell Wendy they would be staying. On the way, he stopped and had a snowball fight with Danny. End of chapter 33. Old dudes only know how to put salt in their beer and yell. I don't know, I've never met an old dude before, so I don't know. You have to do Shelley voice whenever Wendy talks. Oh, God. I think I would need a week of practice, at least. Maybe that'll be a treat for the anybody who sticks it through the whole time. That'll be their treat. So, he's pitched the whatever the part of that, the magneto, I guess, it's part of a plug for the snowmobile. It's no longer going to run. He was faced with that decision, and really at the end, the rationalization he came up with was pretty strong. Although, obviously there was no right choice. The rationalization he came up with was pretty strong. It was the first time that he had thought that if they go down there, his drinking would come back. And he's right. Previously he had been worried about the welfare line. He had been worried about his career as a writer being over for good. He had worried about falling out of graces with Al and having no hope of ever getting back into Stovington. But that was the first time he thought, there's a bar down there. And it was at that point he's like, no, we're not leaving. That was interesting. I mean, to be honest, that's pretty agreeable. I think he's actually right about that, even though I don't think that ultimately he made the right decision based on that right conclusion. But now they're up here. Now they're fucked. The CB radio is destroyed. The phone lines are down. The snowmobile does not work. Jack mentioned that maybe a park ranger would come around to check on them. We have no way to prove that they're planning to do that. Maybe when they figure out that the Torrances aren't responding on the CB radio, that's the best choice, or the best chance, I guess. We got time for one more if it's long, maybe 1.5 if they're short. I almost think it's a good place to end on, but I did drink that 9:30 coffee, so we're going to keep going. Excuse me. Let me check how long chapter... What the fuck chapter is this? Let me check how long chapter 34 is. What's 9:30 coffee? It's when you drink coffee at 9:30 because it's you have a book club to lead at 10 and you're literally dozing off. Okay, it turns out chapter 34 is extremely long. Jesus Christ. Okay, chapter 34 is about 3 chapter 33s. I'm gonna get, I think, maybe about halfway through it, and then when it's around midnight, we'll put a pen in it. A pin? A pen? We'll put something in it. We'll put something there. Chapter 34, The Hedges. It was November 29th, 3 days after Thanksgiving. The last week had been a good one, a Thanksgiving dinner, the best they'd ever had as a family. Wendy had cooked Dick Halloran's turkey to a turn, and they had all eaten to bursting without even coming close to demolishing the Jolly Bird. Jack had groaned that they would be eating turkey for the rest of the winter. Creamed turkey, turkey sandwiches, turkey and noodles, turkey surprise. No, Wendy told him with a little smile, only until Christmas. Then we would have the... How do you pronounce that? Capon? It's the rooster. Jack and Danny groaned together. The bruises on Janny's neck had faded, and their fears seemed to have faded with them. On Thanksgiving afternoon, Wendy had been pulling Danny around on his sled while Jack worked on the play, which was now almost done. Are you still afraid, Doc? She had asked, not knowing how to put the question less boldly. Yes, he answered simply, but now I stay in the safe places. Your daddy says that sooner or later the forest rangers will wonder why we're not checking in the CB radio. They'll come to see if anything is wrong. We might go down then, you and I. Let your daddy finish the winter. He has good reasons for wanting to. In a way, Doc. I know this is hard for you to understand. Our backs are against the wall. Yes, he had answered noncommittally. On this sparkling afternoon, the two of them were upstairs, and Danny knew that they had been making love. They were dozing now. They were happy, he knew. His mother was still a little bit afraid, but his father's attitude was strange. It was a feeling that he had done something that was very hard and had done it right. But Danny could not seem to see exactly what the something was. His father was guarding that carefully, even in his own mind. Was it possible, Danny wondered, to be glad you had done something and still be so ashamed of that something that you tried not to think of it? The question was a disturbing one. He didn't think such a thing was possible in a normal mind. His hardest probings at his father had only brought him a dim picture of something like an octopus, whirling up into the hard blue sky. And on both occasions that he had concentrated hard enough to get this, Daddy had suddenly been staring at him in a sharp and frightening way, as if he knew what Danny was doing. Now he was in the lobby, getting ready to go out. He went out a lot, taking his sled or wearing his snowshoes. He liked to get out of the hotel. When he was out in the sunshine, it seemed like a weight had slipped from his shoulders. He pulled a chair over, stood on it, and got his parka and snow pants out of the ballroom closet. Then sat down on the chair to put them on. His boots were in the boot box, and he pulled them on, his tongue creeping into the corner of his mouth in concentration as he laced them and tied the rawhide into careful granny knots. Pulled on his mittens and his ski mask, and he was ready. He tramped out through the kitchen to the back door, then paused. He was tired of playing out back, and at this time of day the hotel's shadow would be cast over his play area. He didn't even like being in the overlooked shadow. He decided he would put on his snowshoes and go down to the playground instead. Is there an Ian Miller here? Yes, there is. Dick Halloran had told him to stay away from the topiary. But the thought of the hedge animals didn't bother him much. They were buried under snowdrifts now, nothing showing but a vague hump that was the rabbit's head and the lion's tails. Sticking out of the snow the way they were, the tails looked more absurd than frightening. Danny opened the back door and got his snowshoes from the milk platform. 5 minutes later, he was strapping them to his feet on the front porch. His daddy had told him that he, Danny, had the hang of using snowshoes. The lazy, shuffling stride, the twist of the ankle that shook the powdery snow from the lacings just before the boot came back down. And all that remained was for him to build up the necessary muscles in his thighs and calves and ankles. Danny found that his ankles got tired the fastest. Snowshoeing was almost as hard on your ankles as skating, because you had to keep clearing the lacings. Every 5 minutes or so, he had to stop with his legs spread and the snowshoes fat on the snow to rest them. But he didn't have to rest on his way down to the playground because it was all downhill. Less than 10 minutes later, he struggled up and over the monstrous snow dune that had drifted on the Overlook's front porch. He was standing with his mittened hand on the playground slide. He wasn't even breathing hard. The playground seemed much nicer in the deep snow than it had ever been during the autumn. It looked like a fairyland sculpture. The swing chains had been frozen in strange positions, the seat of the big kid's swings resting flush against the snow. The jungle gym was an ice cave guarded by dripping icicle teeth. Only the chimneys of the play overlook were stuck up over the snow, which the other one was buried that way, only not with us inside it. The tops of the cement rings protruded in two places like Eskimo igloos. If you're the real Ian Miller, what's your middle name? You're fucked now, jigs up. Starts with a J. Danny trampled over there, squatted, and began to dig. Before long, he had uncovered the dark mouth of one of them, and he slipped into the cold tunnel. In his mind, he was Patrick McGoohan, the secret agent man. They had shown the reruns of that program twice on the Burlington TV channel, and his daddy never missed them. He would skip a party to stay home and watch Secret Agent or The Avengers. Danny had always watched with them. On the run from KGB agents in the mountains of Switzerland, there had been avalanches in the area, and the notorious KGB agent Slobo had killed his girlfriend with a poisoned dart, but somewhere near was the Russian anti-gravity machine. Perhaps at the end of this very tunnel. He drew his automatic and went along the concrete tunnel, his eyes wide and alert, his breath pluming out. The far end of the concrete ring was solidly blocked with snow. He tried digging through it, was amazed, and a little uneasy, to see how solid it was, almost like ice from the cold and the constant weight of more snow on top of it. His make-believe game collapsed around him, and he was suddenly aware that he felt closed in and extremely nervous in this tight ring of cement. He could hear his breathing. It sounded dank and quick and hollow. He was under the snow. Hardly any light filtered down the hole he had dug to get in there. Suddenly he wanted to be out in the sunlight more than anything. Suddenly he remembered his daddy and mommy were sleeping and didn't know where he was. That if the hole he dug caved in, he would be trapped. And he remembered the Overlook didn't like him. Danny got turned around with some difficulty and crawled back along the length of the concrete ring, his snowshoes clacking woodenly together behind him, his palms crackling in last fall's dead aspen leaves beneath him. He had just reached the end and the cold spill of light coming down from above when the snow did give in. A minor fall, but enough to powder his face and clog the opening he had wriggled down through and leave him in darkness. Changing my middle name to how they say January in German. How do they say it? For a moment his brain froze in utter panic and he could not think. Then, as if from far off, he heard his daddy telling him that he must never play at the Stovington dump because sometimes stupid people hauled old refrigerators off to the dump without removing the doors, and if you got in one and the door happened to shut on you, there was no way to get out. You would die in the darkness. You wouldn't want a thing like that to happen to you, would you, Doc? No, Daddy. But it had happened, his frenzied mind told him. It had happened. He was in the dark, he was closed in, and it was as cold as a refrigerator. And something is in here with me. His breath stopped in a gasp. An almost drowsy terror stole through his veins. Yes. Yes, there was something in here with him. Some awful thing the Overlook had saved for just such a chance as this. Maybe a huge spider that had buried down into the dead leaves, or a rat. Maybe the corpse of some little kid that had died here on the playground. Had that ever happened? Yes, he thought maybe it had. The thought of the woman in the tub, the blood and brains on the wall of the presidential suite. Of some little kid, its head split open from a fall from the monkey bars or a swing, crawling after him in the dark, grinning, looking for one final playmate in its endless playground. Forever. In a moment he would hear it coming. At the far end of the concrete ring, Danny heard the stealthy crackle of dead leaves as something came for him on its hands and knees. At any moment he would feel its cold hand close over his ankle. That thought broke his paralysis. He was digging at the loose fall of snow that choked the end of the concrete ring, throwing it back between his legs in powdery bursts like a dog digging for a bone. Blue light filtered down from above, and Danny thrust himself up like a diver coming out of deep water. He scraped his back on the lip of the concrete ring. One of his snowshoes twisted behind the other. Snow spilled down inside his ski mask and into the collar of his parka. He dug at the snow, clawed at it, seemed to be trying to hold him, to suck him back down, back into the concrete ring where that unseen, leaf-crackling thing was, and keep him there, forever. Then he was out, his face turned up to the sun, and he was crawling through the snow, crawling away from the half-buried cement ring, gasping harshly, his face almost comically white with powdered snow, a living fright mask. That's not correct. Please don't make fun of me. That's what I remembered from high school German class, which I failed. You know, I passed high school German, but we didn't learn any German. He hobbled over to the jungle gym and sat down to readjust his snowshoes and get his breath. As he set them to rights and tightened the straps again, he never took his eyes from the hole at the end of the concrete ring. He waited to see if something would come out. Nothing did, and after 3 or 4 minutes, Danny's breathing began to slow down. Whatever it was, it couldn't stand the sunlight. It was cooped up down there, maybe only able to come out when it was dark, or when both ends of its circular prison were plugged with snow. But I'm safe now, I'm safe. I'll just go back, because now I'm... Something thumped softly behind him. He turned around, toward the hotel, and looked. But even before he looked, can you see the Indians in this picture? He knew what he would see, because he knew what that soft thumping sound had been. It was the sound of a large clump of snow falling, the way it sounded when it slid off the roof of the hotel and fell onto the ground. Can you see? Yes, he could. The snow had fallen off the hedgehog. When he came down, it had only been a harmless lump of snow outside the playground. Now it stood revealed, an incongruous splash of green in all the eye-watering whiteness. It was sitting up, as if to beg a sweet or a scrap. But this time he wouldn't go crazy. He would not blow his cool, because at least he wasn't trapped in some old dark hole. He was in the sunlight. He was just a dog. It's pretty warm out today, he thought hopefully. Maybe the sun had just melted enough snow off that old dog, so the rest fell in the bunch. Maybe that's all his... Don't go near that place. Steer right clear. His snowshoe bindings were as tight as they were ever going to be. He stood up and stared back at the concrete ring, almost completely submerged in the snow, and what he saw at the end he had exited from froze his heart. There was a circular patch of darkness at the end of it, a fold of shadow that marked the hole he dug up to get down inside. Now, in spite of the snow dazzle, he thought he could see something in there, something moving. A hand, the waving hand of some desperately unhappy child. Waving hand, pleading band, drowning hand. Save me, oh please save me. If you can't save me, at least come play with me forever, and forever, and forever. No! Danny whispered huskily. The word fell dry and bare from his mouth, which was stripped of moisture. He could feel his mind wavering now, trying to go away the way it had been when the woman in the room had... No, better not think of that. He grasped at the strings of reality and held them tightly. He had to get out of here. Concentrate on that. Be cool. Be like Secret Agent Man. Would Patrick McGoohan be crying and peeing in his pants like a little baby? Would his daddy? That calmed him somewhat. From behind him, the soft hump sound of falling snow came again. He turned around, and the head of one of the hedge lions was sticking out of the snow now, snarling at him. It was closer than it should have been, almost up to the gate of the playground. Terror tried to rise up, and he quelled it. He was the Secret Agent Man, and he would escape. He began to walk out of the playground, taking the same roundabout course his father had taken on the day the snow flew. He concentrated on operating the snowshoes. Slow, flat strides. Don't lift your foot up too high or you'll lose your balance. Twist your ankle and spill the snow off the crisscross lacings. It seemed so slow. He reached the corner of the playground. The snow drifted high here, and he was able to step over the fence. He got halfway over and then almost fell flat when the snowshoe on his behind foot caught one of the fence posts. He leaned on the outside edge of gravity, pinwheeling his arms, remembering how hard it was to get up once he fell down. Explain the joke. I don't understand. What joke? What joke do you need me to explain? Which one? From his right, that soft sound again, falling in clumps of snow. He looked over and saw the other two lions, clear the snow now down to their forepaws, side by side about 60 paces away. The green indentations that were their eyes were fixed on him. The dog had turned its head. It only happens when you're not looking. Hey! His snowshoes had crossed and he plunged forward into the snow, arms waving uselessly. More snow got inside his hood, and down his neck and into the tops of his boots. He struggled out of the snow and tried to get the snowshoes under him, heart hammering crazily now. Secret Agent Man, Secret Agent Man, remember, you're Secret Agent Man. And overbalanced backward. For a moment he lay there looking at the sky, thinking it would be simpler to just give up. Then he thought of the thing in the concrete tunnel and knew that he could not. He gained his feet and stared over at the topiary. All three lions were bunched together now, not 40 feet away. The dog had ranged off to their left, as if to block Danny's retreat. They were bare of snow except for powdery ruffs around their necks and muzzles. They were all staring at him. But we didn't learn it. No, we just didn't learn any German. I had this teacher who would just put on movies and then read, but they weren't even German movies or subtitled movies. It was like Spider-Man and stuff with no German subtitles. Like, she just didn't teach that class. Like, it was a no-show job, except she showed up. You know what I mean? We didn't even get German names or anything cool. His breath was racing now, and the panic was like a rat behind his forehead, twisting and gnawing. He fought the panic and fought the snowshoes. Daddy's voice. No, don't fight them, Doc. Walk on them like they were your own feet. Walk with them. Yes, Daddy. He began to walk again, trying to regain the easy rhythm he had practiced with his daddy. Little by little, it began to come. But with the rhythm came an awareness of just how tired he was, how much his fear had exhausted him. The tendons of his thighs and calves and ankles were hot and trembly. Ahead he could see the overlook, mockingly distant, seeming to stare at him with its many windows, as if there were some sort of contest in which it was mildly interested. Danny looked back over his shoulder, and his hurried breathing caught for a moment and then hurried on even faster. The nearest lion was now only 20 feet behind, breasting through the snow like a dog paddling in a pond. The two others were to its right and left, pacing it. They were like an army platoon on patrol, the dog still off to their left, the scout. The closest lion had its head down, shoulders bunched powerfully above its neck. The tail was up, as if in the instant before he had turned to look at it, it had been swishing back and forth, back and forth. He had thought it looked like a great big house cat that was having a good time playing with a mouse before killing it. No, if he fell he was dead. They would never let him get up. They would pounce. He pinwheeled his arms madly and lunged his head, the center of gravity dancing just beyond his nose. He caught it and hurried on, snapping glances back over his shoulder. The air whistled in and out of his dry throat like hot glass. The world closed down to the dazzling snow, the green hedges, and the whispery sound of his snowshoes. And something else. A soft, muffled padding sound. He tried to hurry faster and couldn't. He was walking over the buried driveway now, a small boy with his face almost buried in the snow of his parka hood. The afternoon was still and bright. Alright, well, I'm tired. I've got our place marked. We are just a few pages out from the end of chapter 34. But I can go no longer. Oh, thank you all for listening. If you still are. Danny's having a very not fun encounter in the snow of the playground. It seems obvious to me that King is being a little heavy-handed with the comparisons between his father's encounter, as he keeps remembering his father's advice and thinking his father wouldn't be scared in this situation. Obviously, it was. But we're just about done with that one. And the next chapter after that is called The Lobby. That's chapter 35. I'm going to go ahead and make sure I have my place for next time. As always, Monday, maybe Sunday night if you're good, but probably Monday though. Yeah, thank you guys for listening. Have a good night. Bye bye.